Hello everyone, my name is Ali Saifi and I'm going to explain everything about CSS selectors in this video. As you can see, I have divided all CSS selectors in 10 different sections, and we are going to have an example for each section and we are going to discuss all of them. And also there's something that I need to mention that first I'm going to explain important selectors, and when I'm done with those selectors, then I start to explain those selectors which I think they are less important because they are not as frequently as used as those which I call important selectors. So let's just start by important selectors, and then we spend the rest of the video explaining all the other selectors. And sure enough, this is a long video because if we are going to cover every single CSS selector, we need more time. But don't worry, if you just care about the important selectors, you can see that the first part, only about like 25 or 30 minutes of the video is for those important selectors. So this is it. That's something that I needed to mention. Let's start by the most direct way of selecting elements, and that is actually tag selector. For start, I have a style.css. For now, it's empty. It's just a bunch of comments inside that, and we will see those comments. And for start, I have attached this CSS file, and we have some HTML code. And the HTML code is pretty much simple. We don't need to explain this. Just some h1, p tag, and div tags inside this. So the let's and of course, since this is the result, let's put the zoom even on. For example, 1750, and for example, let's imagine that I want to select this code and apply some CSS property to this. For example, a simple CSS property like color. So the most direct way is just actually by specifying the name of the tag. This is something that everyone knows. The tag selector that we have, everyone knows that we can actually choose this one in order to select a tag, and we can say, hey, you can have a color, for example, of blue. And sure enough, we come back here, hit refresh, we will see that the block code is actually blue. And the second way is actually class selector, but before we go to that class selector that we have, let's introduce something here because I want to mention everything in this video to cover everything. And so if we want to cover everything, it's not a bad idea to mention that we have a star selector, and this is star selector. It's a wildcard, and it selects every tag. And usually some developers put some CSS properties inside their star selector. For example, a margin 0 and a padding 0 is something that usually developers do. For example, if you come here, hit inspect on this, we can see that the browser has applied a margin to body. You can see that orange area. So browsers usually have some margins or maybe some paddings for some elements. So this is something that usually, for example, some developers do set the margin to 0 or padding to 0, and if you come back here, sure enough, margin and padding of everything is set to 0. But for this example, I don't want it. Let's put something else inside this, and that's box sizing, border box. This is some CSS property that usually you can find it in star selector. So the point is not, please do not concentrate on this box sizing, border box. Concentrate on the star selector, which means go ahead and select everything. And this box sizing is just something that I wanted to put inside my star selector. Something that usually people put is box sizing, margin, and padding, things like that. Okay, this section was for our tag selector, and of course the class selector and ID selector is something that, again, I think everyone knows. So after covering this basic stuff, we immediately go and cover the big boys actually. So for example, I can apply let's imagine to this p tag, I apply a class to this one, and I say for example, profession. Okay, I applied a class and I call it profession, and we can actually come here and select that profession, and apply a simple CSS property like color brown, for example. And sure enough, if we come here, hit refresh, the margin and padding comes back, and we have that piece of text in brown color. And of course, the ID selector is something that we can test out. For example, we can apply a ID to this tag, and we call it link, for example, link. This is our link, and sure enough, if we use the dot character for selecting a class, so for tag selector, we just write down the name of the tag itself with nothing. For class, we use the dot operator, and for the ID selector, we use the pound sign operator. But this was link. We can say go ahead and select anything that has an ID of link, select it, and for example, increase the font size. Let's not use color every time. For example, increase the font size to 1.5 EM. It means 1.5 times bigger than your default font size. So this was our direct section, which was pretty much simple. A tag selector, class selector, ID selector. So the second part is actually selecting tag by its relatives. And for example, in this section, we will have a children selector and a sibling selector. Let's just start by this children selector. Well, see, imagine that let's see one example. Here you can see we have a div with a class of container, okay? And let's apply another class to this one and give it a class of, for example, about CSS. And imagine that we have another div here with a class of test. And you see why I'm applying this in this test class. And inside this, we have a test text, okay? So inside this div, we have 1p, 2p, and 3p's, okay? So I can go ahead and select every p tag that is inside this about CSS section. So if I go ahead here, for example, say dot about section, and use a space character, when we hit a space, it means go ahead and select the children that are inside this about CSS. And if you hit P, it means that go ahead and select every P tag that are inside this about CSS. We can go ahead and actually apply for example, a color aqua. So if we come back here, you can see that this P tag CSS is okay. This P tag, okay, but this block code is not, because we have used another selector to set the color to blue. So that's why if we actually hit inspect on this one, it says that for the block code, so the color is blue because we have a block code selector inside that. Okay, and also this is this test text that we have here. But there's another thing, because you may think, okay, well, this P actually is not technically directly inside this div, right? If you take a look at it, this P, yes, this is directly inside this div, and also this P is directly inside that, but this P is not directly inside that. So that's why I created a new section with a test section. For that, there's also another selector for children selector, and it's this angel bracket character that we use. So this means if you use that character, it means go ahead and select every p tag that is directly inside that. So we can go ahead and actually apply for example, a purple. I think this dark violet thing that we have. We come back here, hit refresh. Of course, this is dark violet, this is dark violet, and if we come back here, hit inspect, sure enough, we can see that for this one, both selectors are applied. Both of them are correct for these two, but since this one has come after that, and this is why this is being applied. And there's something about CSS selectors strength is something that I am going to talk about in this video, of course. But as you can see, the strength of this is bigger than it, so that's why we are seeing that in dark violet. And of course this is not selected by that last selector that we just wrote, because this text is not directly inside the p tag. Yes, sure enough, it's inside that, but it's not directly inside that. So that is the difference that we have. So, and for the sibling selectors that we have, so for the sibling selector, let's take a look at our HTML code here for a moment. And we can have, for example, let's see, we have a tag here, right? Okay. And imagine that we have another a tag here, okay? And with a pound sign, and we call it a test link, okay? And so let's imagine that I am going to select every a tag that comes right after h1 tag. So that's why it's called sibling selector. For this one, that was children. For this one is sibling selector. So if I say that, so come here, let's use something. If I say h1 plus a, and let's imagine, let's say that text decoration none. Let's remove the text decoration, because if you take a look at this, and let's come back here, hit refresh, you can see that this link, yes, it has a text decoration, it's underlined, but for this one we no longer have a text decoration, because sure enough there is a selector which has set the text decoration to none. As you can see, the text decoration has been set to none. And also there's another character. Let's imagine, let's use this one, h1 a. Let's use this a. See, when we set that, well, what does it mean? It means go ahead and select the very first a tag that comes after h1. Okay, so in this case, both this a tag and also this a tag, they both come after h1. Sure enough, you can see, and they are siblings, of course. But this one says go select the very first one, but this one, it means go ahead and select all of them. For example, we can set a font weight of bold to all of them to see that the font weight goes bold. And sure enough, you can see the font weight of both of them is now bold, because we have this selector, that this selector has been applied to both of them. Okay, so this is the difference. Select the very first one and select every a tag that comes after h1. So this was our two of our section, and let's there's something about combining selectors that I mean. What do I mean by combining selectors? For example, this is not a selector exactly that we can select everything, but we can have multiple selectors. For example, imagine that I want to say that all the h1 tag and all the h2 tags, I want to select both of them and apply some CSS properties to them. So, and of course, I'm sure this is something that you know, but since I wanted to cover everything inside this video, this is something that I do. So you can see I have put a comma between h1 and h2 tag, and it says go ahead and apply these CSS properties to all of these. And sure enough, we can say a color, for example, we can set the color to, let's choose something good. Let's use this lime green. Okay, hit refresh. Sure enough, we have selected two tags and everything is good to go. Now it's time for our not selector. Okay, for not selector, it's very simple. It's just looks like a function that you can pass in a selector inside that. What do I mean by that? For example, let's imagine that I am going to select every p tag except that p tag that has a class of, for example, intro. For example, I give a class of intro to this because this is the intro text, and I'm going to select everything except this intro. So the way that we select it, if we say p, all right, it selects every p tag. So we have one selector, which it could be tag selector, or it could be class selector, anything. And we say not with parentheses, and now inside this not we just pass in another selector. For example, this time I'm going to use a class selector inside this not, and the class selector that I'm going to use is .intro. So what it means, it goes ahead and selects every p tag except those who have a intro class. So for this one, let's use a background color because I'm trying to use simple CSS properties, and the background color is just a, for example, this gold thing that we have here. Come back here, hit refresh, and sure enough, all of them have that background color except that intro thing that we had, and this is actually our intro. And if we go ahead, hit inspect, we can see that it has an intro class, and that's why this is not having that style like the other ones. And about attribute selectors, I'm not going to cover all of them in the first segment, because at the first segment we are going to cover important stuff, and then we will come back again to cover those with less importance. For example, the attribute selector, there's one way for start. We can just say that if anything that has a specific attribute, you can apply that some properties. Just having that attribute, it doesn't matter what the value is. How we can select those things? For example, let's say we want to select everything that has a title attribute. If you do not know what title attribute is some info, okay? The title attribute is just when you hover the mouse on something, you can see that some info is presented there when I hover the mouse on that. And this is what title attribute does. And imagine that we have this title attribute for some tags. For example, this tag, or imagine that this tag. So 3 tags, they have that title attribute. So I'm going to select everything that has a title attribute. And that's it. Just having a title attribute is enough. If I combine selectors, for example, if I say P and with no spaces and nothing inside it, it means go ahead and select every P tag that has a title attribute. But this one, it doesn't matter, anything that has a title attribute when you remove that. Well, for that, imagine we can set the cursor on help. Okay, the cursor of the mouse, it change the cursor of the mouse. We exchange, you can see that the cursor is okay for everything, but for this one, the cursor changed. As you can see, the cursor is now changed. But for this text also as well, the cursor is changed, and the cursor is changed, and like that. And of course, if we say P title, this is something that don't forget. Go ahead and select every P tag that has a title attribute. So this one is the only thing. So, and just having an attribute is enough. And also we can check something, that if an attribute were equal to something. This could be used, for example, for an input tag. And it's input type text, and the name of this input is just email. So for this one, we can select, if we don't want to apply any class to this or anything, we can just select it with that name attribute that it has. For example, we can say go ahead and select every input name. If we say that, you say go ahead and select everything that has a name attribute, and that's enough. But we can say input name equals to, for example, email. So select every input with the name of an email, and sure enough, we can just set a border of 3 pixel solid blue. Okay, that's it. You can come back here inside result, refresh, and this is not selected. Why? Did I do I have a typo or something? We have a problem, it seems. Well, I said go ahead, select every input with the name of email. Yeah, it's 3PZ. Yeah, so this is it. This is great. Now it's okay. And of course, we have modified that. But the other ones, we have some other things. So this was for the equal to section. So let's cut that inside there. But for the other ones, we will come back and cover them, because these other attribute selectors are not as important as what we had. So, and inside these state based on states, for example, hover, active, visited, link. I think the most important one is a hover one for start. And we all know what hover does. We can actually say, we had a link here in our code. We had a link with an ID of link here, and we had a link here with a test link, and we can give it a class of test link, okay? And for the hover, these hovers are pseudo classes. They are statements. They are combined with other selectors, for example, test link, and I'm sure the hover is something that everyone knows, so that's why I'm just passing very quickly. For example, we can just change the color, for example, to, let's say, this one. Okay, just that's it. Come back here, hit refresh, and sure enough, when it's hovered, the color is changing. For the hover, we all know that for the active visited link, they are not as important, but let's cover the visited one because the visited one could be useful in some circumstances. And imagine, so when the page is being loaded, as you can see, the color for this text is purple and this one is blue. Why this one is purple? Because I have already visited this link, and browsers, they treat these A tags that they are visited to a purple color. If you want to disable that or change that, so we can do that with, for example, we can do that for all the hover effects. For example, all the visited, not only test link. We can say go ahead, select every A tag that is visited, okay, and we are going to set the color to yellow, or imagine disable that, set that to inherit, and do that. So this is now what is happening here. And now it's time for those selectors that are related to forms and form element, form validation, things like that. For example, for the focus, is just like the hover, it's a pseudo class. Those who start with these columns are called pseudo class. For example, we can say, well, we had an input, right? Do you remember? Well, we can apply a class to this, or we can select it with name attribute, whatever we want, but let's use a class and call it the input, okay? And sure enough, we can say, go ahead and select the input when it's focused. If you do not know what focus is, well, imagine, this is what happens. When I click on this, you can see that the browser, the Chrome, applies an outline over my border. This is something that browser does for input tags. See, if you come back here, hit inspect, this is our input, right? When we focus on this, and also there's something in this tool that you can learn, you can right click on this and say force state, and you can set the force the state on active, hover, focus, anything. You can set that on focus, and this is on focus. And as you can see, when we focus the input, well, here doesn't show anything, but because it's outline is a little tricky. Outline is just like the border, but it comes on top of the border. So imagine that I want to say that, first of all, I do not want that black color that Chrome applies. So the first thing that I do is that I say the outline should be none, so we get rid of that thing, and we can change the border color to, for example, brown. Come here, hit refresh, and sure enough, when we click, the black thing, does the black thing still exist? Let's zoom in a little bit. No, the black thing is gone, sure. So this is it for the focus state. Let's put the zoom on 150% again. And for the important ones here is the placeholder, the first thing that I'm going to do. But the other ones I'm going to come back and cover in second segment because I believe they are less frequently used. So for this input, imagine that we have a placeholder, okay? And the placeholder, let's write something in it. For example, we can say email address. It's inside the placeholder, and sure enough, we come back here, hit refresh, we can see that the email address is there. Let's do something before, because this is something that also you need to know. I think knowing this fact helps you in so many circumstances. Let's see this important fact with an example. In order to see that, we need to have a font. For example, let's search fonts google.com. I am going to import a font from Google in my project from Google APIs. It doesn't matter what the font is, where you bring it, if it's a file or anything, but I want a font that it's obvious that it's different. For example, this one. This one, it's obvious that we have that the texture is different. So let's use a import tag and let's copy this. So if you come here inside our CSS section, we can actually go ahead and paste this here, so we no longer need the style tag and not pop-ins. This is the fonts that we are going to import in our project. And if we come here and let's say we say body and we set the font family to what we imported. Okay, if we come here, hit refresh, you can see everything has that new font family that we just imported, but the placeholder is not having that font family. I remember one of my friends were saying, let's say CSS is stupid. I hate CSS. I hate CSS. So what's wrong? I said, see, whatever I did, this placeholder does not apply the font family. I said, well, the reason is because just font family does not inherit the font family. What is CSS inheritance? Let's take a glance to understand even more. For example, here, if I have a span tag and call it for example, 1, 2, 3, and if you come here, hit refresh, you can see that the color of the span tag is black. It's automatically inherited. And of course, if we select this div, put that inside a div, give it a class of, for example, test inheritance, and in test inheritance, let's apply. This is something important that you should know. It's very good. Since this is a temporary thing, let's put this tag, because where we were at, I want to write some CSS. Inside our we were inside this placeholder section. So for example, we set the color, for example, on, let's use this green one. Okay, and of course, when I set, I am setting the test, I am setting the div, the color of this div to green. So what happens is, well, the color green will also be inherited, and this span tag is also going green because it inherits that. But sometimes there are some circumstances that the inheritance does not work. For example, if we use an A tag, the color is no longer inherited for A tag because the browser has something in mind. So also for placeholder, the font family is not being inherited automatically. For everything, yes, we did set the font family of the body to something. We changed the font family body. But everything inherited that except placeholder. So placeholder do not inherit font family. So this is the important fact that I wanted to say. So let's clean this section because that's that section I wanted to prove a point just. So come back in my CSS section. Here we can go ahead and select every placeholder, and we can set the font family to, what was the name of the font family? Let's copy that. Let's use font family. So we can set the font family to this. And of course, if you come back here, hit refresh, sure enough, now the font family is changed. So this is something to have in mind about placeholders, and actually we can customize this placeholder. And for this one, let's say, imagine, yes, I want to have the font family for every placeholder. But for this placeholder, only for the input, placeholder, go ahead and use a font style of italic. And if you come back here, hit refresh, font style is italic, and everything's good to go. So let's go to our next section, which is actually by the order. In order to understand this order, selectors like nth child and nth of type, things like that, let's imagine that we have a table here. I pasted a table here and just a HTML code here, and there's nothing so complicated about it. If we hit refresh, come back here, we can see that this is a table, some languages, whether if it's front end or back end, and if it's a language or framework, well, and things like that. So why did I use the word section for it? There are lots of better words for that. Anyway, let's come back to our CSS. So here, well, first of all, for the moment, imagine that this child and of type, they act exactly like each other. I'm going to tell you the difference, but for the moment, let's use, for example, this nth of child that we have, let's use for a number. For example, we can say go ahead and select every TD that is inside the table. So look at, imagine I'm using a space, okay? And this space means go every TD that is inside table, not directly, just being inside that is enough. Go ahead and select, we can say the nth child, and go ahead and select the second TD, and go ahead and apply a color to this one and set the color to red. Okay, come back here, hit refresh, and sure enough, this is what happens. Well, you may have thought that we would have the second one and there will be only one TD that is red, but you're wrong. See, when we say it like that, it means go ahead and select the TD that is the second child, that is a second child. What do we mean by that? See, this is a TR, okay? Inside this TR, there is no TD tag. So it has no child with a TD tag, okay. This is a TR, yes, it has so many, there's three, in fact, it has 3 TD children. And all of them, they all have 3 TD children inside them. But this is a second child, this is a second child, this TD here. But there's something wrong with VS Code. This is a bug with VS Code. They have to fix this. See, I'm trying to highlight the JavaScript, right? It went, okay, but the CSS is not. See, I cannot highlight the CSS. There's a bug. I don't know what is causing the problem, but VS Code has got to use this, fix this. So anyway, now you get the point. This is what second child looks like. And now it's time to understand the difference of child and type. As you can see, for all of these things that I have, for example, for nth child, we can pass in a number and say the first one, the second one, or the third one, which one. For all of these, the nth child or nth of type, first child or first of type, last child or last of type, nth last, and as you can see, for all of them we have a child of type, child of type, child of type. So we need to understand the difference between child and of type. See, we said let's use this nth child to, let's change that to of type, and let's see what is the difference. See, here this TD is, yes, it is the second child. Of course, you can see, if we can say this is a tier and this is this TD. But this is first of type. It's a second child, but it's first of type. What do we mean by that? Well, of type, it means it's the first TD. It is the first of its own type. What is its type? It's TD. So it's the first of type. So actually this JavaScript, this Bootstrap, this PHP, they all first of type, but second child. Okay, this is the difference. So if we come back here, table, so for this one, if we say table TD nth of type it to have a color of red, what happens is, so this is the nth of type 2, and the front end should be front end, these should be highlighted red. If you hit refresh, sure enough, this is what we have. And of course, if we come here and change the 2 to 1, what happens is, well, this is the first of type. You can see, come back here, so this is nth of type 1, and this is the first of type. As you can see, the first of type for the TD is Bootstrap, and all of them are selected. Since we have used the TD for that, so it selects the TD of 1. But if you do not use any tag, what happens is, so this is what happens. So because all of them are nth of type 1, okay? So this is getting, okay. And also there are some shortcuts for this one. For example, I am not going to cover first child or first of type, because once you understand the nth of type 1, you immediately understand these two as well completely. So we have, for example, for nth of child, nth of type of 1, let's use nth child, for example, here. And come back here, not child. We can use first of type for rather than this whole one, okay? First of type. Of course, they will have the same result. So there are some shortcuts because it's so obvious that I'm not going to cover that. First child, first of type. Last child, last of type. So this is okay. Nth last child. Well, this nth last child is just like the nth of type and nth child, but it's counting from the end to the first. So that's the difference. But this only child and only type, I think it needs to be mentioned, and I will come back and explain them in the second segment. But the point is, before we go on and finish this section of selecting based on order, there are a couple of ways for selecting or providing something inside this nth of type or nth of child or things like that. One is with a number. As you can see, we passed a number like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's another way we can use. For example, you can see there we have a T body here, and inside this T body we have so many different TR tags, and these TR tags are directly inside this T body. Okay, so for this one we can say go ahead and select table. Every TR, not a table, let's use T body inside our body. Go ahead and select every TR that is directly inside this TR, so it selects all of them. And also we can apply some more to this, and we can say, so with words, the words are even and odd. So we can say nth child, okay, nth child. For this case, since we have only TR inside that, except TR, we do not have anything directly inside the T body. For this case, nth type and nth of type and nth child they work just like each other. So we can say nth child even, okay, and we can just use nth child odd. So use the words even and odd. We can have two different background colors for them. So because this is something that usually people do so that the table become more readable. For example, for one of them, should we use gray, and for the other one, for another one of them, let's use another color. For example, should be something that not too, for this light green, should be something light, I believe. If you come back here, hit refresh, sure enough, the even and the odd numbers, they all have different styles. So we can use, one way is to use number, the other way is to use the words like even and odd, and the last way is to actually provide a formula. For example, let's use, let's use this table TR, okay? Table TR. And we are going to say, let's nth child again, nth child. So I'm not going to have one example for nth child and one example for nth of type, because you know what's the difference, and they completely perform or act like each other, but the only difference is that they type and children. So that's why I'm not going to example for both of them. And so we can end, and we can say n plus 2. And for the n plus 2, we are going to have a font weight of bold, for example. What happens is, as you can see, from the 2 to the last, this is something that happens. It goes from, so the first one is ignored. So this is a formula that, in order to understand this formula, this is the way that we understand it. It means from the second one to the last, this thing. Or we can even use complicated, more complicated one. For example, 2n plus 1, what does that mean? Well, this 2 plus n1 is exactly these green ones that we use is exactly an odd number. The odd numbers actually are 2n plus 1. If you're good at math, you know 2n plus 1 is actually odd. Or 2n is actually even. See, this is what happens. So this is the formula for this that we can check out the documentation for more formulas that you can see, but you can create formulas as well. We will come back and explain this only child, but the 9 as well is something that is I don't think is that important. But since it's a section for itself, let's cover that. For example, we had a p tag here, right? This example, this h1 that we have, this profession. Let's select this profession tag that we had. Well, these are pseudo elements. So we saw pseudo classes. These pseudo classes, they start with one code, but pseudo elements like placeholder, they start with double colons. See, this is a placeholder. This is a pseudo element. So for this one, we also have a pseudo element for first letter. So we can say dot profession, the first letter. So for the first letter, we are going to use a color of red. For example, a font size of 2em, and what happens is if we come back here inside our code, hit refresh, we can see that our profession, this I, the first character for that, is now has a different style. Let's use my profession because the first one is actually a word, is full stack developer. So come back here, hit refresh, you can see the M is like that. We have styled the M. And also we can select the first line. So let's convert that to lowercase. And for this one, we can just have a font style of italic, okay? And we can just set the color to something so that we can see it. And the color that I choose, so choosing color is very hard for me. Peru, let's use Peru, let's see how it looks. And this is the first line, because so in order to see that, let's make that smaller and see what happens. You can see the first line, it depends if the text, if it had a longer text, we would have seen it in the first place, but for this one, it's just we have to make that smaller to see that. And for our final section here, we are going to, if I'm going to say which one is important, I think the target one is something important that could help you in some circumstances. So this target one is something that I'm going to talk about. So for start, imagine that I have some extra content after this table, and I am going to move my this website area that I have. I am going to put this website area between this table and this extra content of ours, and I'm going to assign an ID to this one because I am going to make it a target website area. What do I mean by target? Let's write the ID of website area. Well, sometimes we can actually create a link and redirect user not to some other page, but to the same page, but a section that we want. For example, click to go to website area, and I am going to apply. So as for the href, I have written a £sign and a website area, so it will be send us to this section that has an ID of website area. And IDs should be unique. We should never use multiple IDs for something. So for here, if I click on this link, you can see I will be redirected to the website area, but maybe I have something wrong because this is my website area and this is my website area. So let's make the zoom a little bit more so that you can see. So click, so you can see now we are redirected to this website area that we have. So it redirects us to there. In order to see that better, so because we have to have some more even extra content, because when we are we need to make the zoom bigger or make the content more so that we have more space to scroll. So let's make this one, make this one, duplicate this thing that we have here and hit refresh, and again when we click on this link and we are redirected sent to this section. So this is now a target. Why it's a target? Because we have clicked on this link and we are redirected to this section. We can select actually this, and the question is, what is the use of this? We need to have an example for a usage of this. Let's first learn the CSS, the structure, the code, and I will tell you about a usage of these things. For example, we can say hashtag a pound sign website area when it's a target. Go ahead and apply a background color, for example, of something. Let's use this bisque thing that we have. So if you come back here, hit refresh, if you remove this website area from our URL and hit enter, so and let's put the zoom on, for example, 200%. Well, for the first, you can see there is no style on this section of yourdailycodes.com, the link that we have. And of course, when you click on this, the background color of biscuit will be applied to that. So what is the use of this? For example, imagine that we have created a notification and we are going to say, hey, John, someone replied to your comment, and we are going to provide a link. And when we have a link, when we send someone a link and someone opens that link, for example, this link, okay, the page will be loaded from the top, from the beginning of the page, of course. But if we have something in our URL, for example, # website area, for this one, if I hit enter, the page should be loaded. So let's hit enter again. The page should be loaded at this section, at the section of the website area that we have. But why it's not happening? Maybe we have a typo or something. So let's sure that we do not have a typo. Let's copy this. Maybe it seems that we had a typo. Yeah, we had a typo inside our URL. So when we hit enter for this now, you can see the page is loaded from that section. And for these circumstances, we can highlight that comment, that specific comment. We're going to, hey, someone replied to your comment, and we are going to redirect the user to that place, and we are going to give a different style to that specific comment that we have, for example. So this is the point, this is the target, this is something that is, I think, very useful in so many circumstances. So we can actually have a different style for something that is a target. So this is it. We covered the important stuff, and so let's come back to those we didn't cover, because we thought they're not frequently used as the other ones. So for the first section and second section, we covered everything. And also for the third section, I wanted to introduce this comma separator. And the not selector, we know about it. But for the attribute selector, we saw two of them. But for the other ones, let's have an example. For having an example, you can see before this table, let's imagine that we have a div. There are a bunch of A tags inside this, and we have 6, sorry, not 5. We have 6 A tags inside this, and they all have an href attribute, and imagine they are some download links. Okay, for this one, we can have different styles for this as well. For example, imagine in order to have all of them, so let's go here. And inside this section, so we can say containing a word. For example, we can say inside our download area, there are some A tag, okay, and where the A tag, so this is the we can say the href, okay, a star equals to, for example, let's say tech. Okay, what happens is we are going to say if the href attribute of this A tag, which A tag? The A tag that is inside this download area. If contains the word tag, go ahead and select it. So we can go ahead and select that. For example, we can say a color of red to this one. So if we come back here, hit refresh, you can see the download 1 and 4 is now colored as red, because sure enough, in 1 and 4 we have the words tech, as you can see. Although this is tech and science, but this is technology, although they are both selected and completely fine. But we have two sections, one containing a word or containing the exact word. These two are different. For this two, if we come here, for example, and set the font weight to bold, if now we are not using the star character, we are using tilde character. Well, this one means good and the exact word of tech. And sure enough, if we come here, well, the point is, if we come here, hit inspect on this one, hit refresh, we can see the href star has selected, yes, but none of them are selected because technology, yes, this is none of them are selected, it seems. And sure enough, it should not be selected because imagine that we are using, let's use a space rather than this hyphen that we have used. So now we have used tech and science. So the folder has a space in it. So that's why. So this is the difference. If you hit refresh, now it is bold because it does. Because I thought that the hyphen is considered as a different word, but it seems no. In HTML, it doesn't. So if it's hyphen, so this is no longer the exact word, because I thought it's now is it considers that as the exact word, but this one not as the exact word. But it seems no, tech and support. So that's why we have that. So if we have hyphens, it no longer selects that, and then you can see it's not bold. But if we have space rather than that, this is it. So this is the difference between these two. Containing a word, containing a word containing the exact word. And also we have a starting with and end with. So of course I'm not going to put an example here and for that, but you get the point. For example, let's say if something starts with the word science, and again let's use the science fiction like that. We can use the science for this one. So copy this so that we can have everything. So the science. So this is it, not the word tech, but we are using this character. So we are saying that everything that starts with a word of this, and we are going to set the font style to italic, for example. Font style to italic. So this is something that we can see. Hit refresh, and sure enough, these two are italic. And the last one also. The last one also starts with science, as you can see, but not the exact word. But there are some others. You can see this is science. Science is inside this. Yes, it's inside it, but it's not starting with that. And of course, we are going to have that for the exact two. For the exact, we have to use this character. If it starts with, we can go ahead and set the font size to 2em, make that bigger. Sure enough, hit refresh only, and it seems that none of them is like that science. So this is it. So for the second one and the third one, I thought that it should have that science thing that we had. Come back here, hit refresh. And for the second one and the third one, you can see that the font size is not being applied, it seems. So for this, this is so rarely used that I have forgotten about it because it's so rarely used. So you can see that that style is not applied. So why that is? So let's use this one, the character. So come back here, hit refresh. Oh, for this one works. Interesting. So this is welcome to HTML and CSS, ladies and gentlemen. So for this one, the definition of the word is different with the other one. So for this one, you can see we have put a space for this, so this is not seeing that as a text. So but when we used Titans, it went, and so this is so tricky, this HTML and CSS, these things. Those who are rarely used are rarely less used, they are very tricky. And of course, the last thing that we are going to cover about attributes, something that ends with something. We can say, for example, with $, go ahead and select everything that ends with PDF, and we are going to apply everything that has a PDF part for that. And for PDF, we are going to just set a background color of blue, and that's it. We come back here, hit refresh, and sure enough, the first one ends with a PDF. So they were everything about attribute selectors. And let's go to the next section. We didn't cover this active, or we did visit a link. So this active is actually the moment that person is clicking on that link. So it's a very brief moment. So I think the color yellow should be for the active one. I think it's a better color for that. But for that, we can use a color of let's use dark violet. The default, let's just use this one. So if you come back here, hit refresh, well, those links that we have previously visited are now that color, but the active is a very brief moment. For a second, the color will be changed to yellow. So that was it. We covered hover, active, visited, but for this one, the link one, you can see visited link. So let's see. Let's imagine that I have a tag here, okay, a tag, and some text inside this, link, okay. Well, let's remove this href attribute and come here, hit refresh, and we can see that some text inside this link is written in black. But this one has a, if we apply a href to this, you can see now this is a has changed. So the a tag that has a href and a tag that does not have a href are different. So those are actually, so this link, if you say a link, okay, if it's a link, we can have a color. So if it has a href, actually, this link means if it has a href. So we can say go ahead and set the color to, for example, let's use this one. And of course, if we come back here, the colors are changed here. But if they are not a link, so for them, if we say remove this link section, if you come back here, hit refresh, the some text also, this is, the color is changed. But for these one, the other ones also as well. So this is something that we mean by link, actually, if it is a link. So this one is not a link anymore. So we covered everything about section 6, and now in section 7 we had some form related selectors. So let's cover them all. In order to cover them, let's imagine that we have a form, and inside this form I have a bunch of tags, an input type text, some checkboxes, some radio boxes, some input type number, an input type URL, things like that, with a submit button, and of course this is the result, how everything looks. So for this one, first of all, we have a section enabled, disabled, read-only, read-writes, things like that. Well, every input is enabled by default, which means user can come check that, write something inside that. Everything is actually enabled. So, but disabled, for example, unless we tell it. For example, for this one, I have said this one is disabled. So we can actually go ahead and select this one. As you can see, this one is disabled and user cannot check something in it. The other one, yes, sure, he can, but this one can't. So for this one, for example, we can actually go ahead and select every input that is disabled, okay? And we can actually go ahead and say, for example, the cursor, change the mouse cursor to not allowed. We have so many cursor types, and you can see this is how not allowed looks, and see this is the input which is not allowed. So for that one, we can change that. And enabled also, there's a word for that, read only and read. But have in mind that in HTML section, we write the read only like this with no spaces. But in CSS, we write it like this. We have a hyphen between that. So we say read only. Those who are read only, I'm going to set a background color of gray for them. So we come back here, see the background color is gray for those read-onlys. And also we can set the cursor to not allowed for those because they are read-only. User cannot is not allowed to change that. And For this one, again, every input is read write by default, which means he can read or write something in that. And again, for HTML we do not have hyphen, but inside our CSS we do have hyphen. So for the read writes we can select them, but I think this is stupid. Everything is actually that by default. Anyway, so for valid and invalid, so this happens when the form gets submitted. Imagine that we have a form here, right? And I write something inside this URL. When I hit enter, you can see it says please enter a URL, because this is not a URL. For those, we can say actually come here and say, for example, input. Each input that is invalid, has the invalid status, we can set the border color to red. Okay, since since this input does not have a border, changing the border color is not enough. We can say border, for example, 2px solid red. Change that to border. So if you come back here, write something inside this, hit submit, and of course, when it's invalid, this is what happens. The border goes red for the moment, for that thing. And also for the numbers, so it says give a grade from 1 to 10. And actually, if you come here, the thing that we have applied, we set from 1 to 10. If someone writes 13, it's invalid, of course. But no, for that one, it's not valid and invalid. For this one, actually, browser lets pass for this one. This is something else. This is some in range and out of range we should use for that one. But for this one, it's invalid, even if it's an input type email, if it was wrong. Okay, so for this one, what was actually in range and out of range. For example, we can actually select every so let's for the in range and out of range, we can actually select every input which the type is on number, so, and it's in range. We can have that for this one, and also we can have that for out of range. Again, out of range. So for this one, we say a border color, border of 2 pixels solid red, but for this one, a border of 2 solid green is what we are going to apply. And let's make sure if we have min and max. Yes, we no, it's not from min max. Sorry, I don't know why did I put 0 from 2. So it should have a min and max for sure, so that it works. So come back here. So maybe that is why in the previous example it did not work. For example, if you write 14 submit, so that's why it did not work. So for the invalid ones, we can actually say, for example, dotted, okay, dotted, and let's clean this for a moment. Let's comment them out. So maybe that's why we did have that problem. So if we come here, hit 14 and straight write something, so sure enough, yes, they are invalid. So that's why the dotted is being applied. Okay, that's it. I have used, I don't know why I have written from and to. So the min and max, and so of course we have in range and out of range also as well. So for this two, we can have that. For example, if we write, for example, 8, what happens is, so we didn't comment this, so let's initiate it with the value. For example, let's initiate it with the value of 7. Come here, hit refresh. So for the 7, you can see it's in range and it's green. So sure enough, 13 is out of range and it goes red. And so for this, 2 is being applied. If we come here, hit inspect on this thing, we can see for this input, both invalid and out of range are selected. But since this selector is actually stronger, so that's why it's being applied. It's stronger for 2 reasons. One, it's coming after that, so the selector that comes after after something is more stronger, and also it's more complicated and more specific. The more specific the selector is, the stronger it is. So you can see this one is more specific. It's input type number out of range, so that's why something to have in mind. So, and that's it. That's for out of range and in range. and things like that, required, optional. So also we have, so everything is optional by default. So all of these tags are optional, are not required when we submit a form. But if something be required, for example, let's imagine that this website is required, okay? If this website is required, the user can no longer submit it. And also, since this is required and there is no value inside it, this is now considered as invalid. So that's why it has that. If we remove that required, hit refresh, it's no longer invalid, but it's valid. But it's now invalid, and it's something to have in mind as well. So for the required and the optional, we have some CSS properties that we can apply. For example, we can say input. Every input that is required could have a, for example, a border width of 8 pixels, for example. This is something that I want to show you guys. Just that's it. Not 8. 8 is just too much. Let's put that on 4 pixels. So I'm going to show you that is actually possible. We have also optional as well, the opposite of that. And for this checked and default, and this is something that we need to discuss. So let's start with the default one. The default one, let's imagine that this input type, this checkbox, is checked by default. So for when the page is being loaded, the first thing that it does, it goes ahead and checks this. So you can read refresh, you can see that this checkbox one is checked by default. So we can have a style for that if something is checked by default. So we can say that the input default, we can go ahead and apply that section for the type checkbox as well if you want to. For the default one, let's apply a box shadow. For example, 0, 0, 1 pixel, 1 pixel blue. Okay, so what happens is if we come back here, hit refresh, we can see that this has a box shadow around it for the default one. The box shadow is a little, zoom in even more to see that. And we can make that 4 pixels. So yeah, 4 pixels is more obvious so that you can see them. And for this one, also we can set the checked one. And also we can say if something is checked. So we can go ahead and click on this. If something is checked, go ahead and apply a red one. So come back here, hit refresh, it's red. But you need to know that, let's come back here for this input. So this default one is being applied to this, but it's been removed because there is a stronger selector. It has selected that because it's both default and both checked, this one. But these things, they are only checked, not default, because user did check them. So you can see that blue is not applied to them. So in order to understand that, we need to have actually different CSS properties. For example, let's make them a little bigger. For the default one, we can say transform. So because this is not text, something in text, we need to use something else. A scale 2, we make that 2 times bigger. So so you can see the default one is 2 times bigger, but those who are checked are red. So you can see that one was the default one. That one was the default one that was checked actually. So that's it. So we have a default, we have a checked, and we have an indeterminate. Indeterminate is something that is not determined. What do we mean by that? See, this is checked, not checked, checked, not checked, something between these two. With HTML alone, we cannot set something to indeterminate. It's something that you need to use JavaScript for that. For example, we can go ahead and use JavaScript to set the value of some of these to indeterminate. But since I'm not going to discuss JavaScript and talk about JavaScript, I just copy some JS code inside my code here. So at the end of my body tag, we are going to create a script tag just to set something. So we can give a my checkbox ID to some of them. It's go ahead and make that as indeterminate. Indeterminate is a value that you cannot set that with HTML or CSS. It's something that you can set that with JavaScript. And let's apply a ID to this, and if we come back here, hit refresh, and this is indeterminate. You can see that this is indeterminate because it means that it hasn't been selected. It's not, these are unchecked. These are unchecked. This is checked. But this is none of them, not unchecked. So this is something that we can use CSS in order to check or uncheck that. But for the default values, when it's loading is indeterminate, we can have a style for that one as well. So that's why I say they are less used compared to what we have. So we can come here, and for indeterminate, so lowercase that, and we can set the scale transform scale to for this one 1.5, and come back here, hit refresh just to apply some CSS, and it's 1.5 times bigger than the default. And also you can see that these radio boxes are having that CSS property. They are an input of indeterminate. So radio boxes are considered as indeterminate. It's something that you need to have in mind as well for the thing that we have. So inside this 8th section that we had, the only thing that we did not cover, so we covered everything about forms now, was this only child. So the first child, last child, nth last child, they're obvious. They just work like this nth child, this nth last child, but it's from the last. The first child and last child is also. But for the only child is something that we can say if, for example, we can say those p tags who are only child, okay, who are only child, go ahead and give a background color of blue violet to them, and let's see what happens. So the p that is only child, let's see if we can find some. So first of all, this p is not the only child, because you can see this is one child, this is another child, okay. So let's use this p as well, this p as well, this p, I think it is this test text. So come back here, hit refresh, this test text, let's find that test. You see, this test text does have that property that we wanted. So if it's the only child. But if you would have used only of type, this would have been selected for sure, because this is only of type, the only p tag that is inside that. So if we come here and say only of type, and let's comment this one for a moment, come back here, hit refresh, sure enough, that one is selected as well. So this one here, this profession, my work is, so where is the profession? Yes, this is my profession that has been applied that CSS property. So this is the difference between only child and only of type. So we can comment these two, comment that one, so that we have selected only one of them. So that's it. That is covered as well. First letter and first line is also covered in this section. They are all okay, but for some of them that could be useful also is one of this selection. So you can see when I highlight something with mouse, you can see everything has a blue color and a white background. We can actually customize that with selection. And in selection, do I have semicolon or column? Oh yeah, this selection we can actually apply that. We can say the background color to, for example, pink, and see, hit refresh, and you can see sure enough, not sure enough. So what happened? We have a typo something, or what is it? Selection. So let's use this one. It seems that we have a typo. Yeah, I had a typo for some reason. So set the background color to pink, and sure enough, the background color is pink, and we can apply some CSS properties to that. And this root section is actually somewhere that, so have you ever noticed how can we select? So we can select this, we can select this tag, we can select this tag, we can select everything, right? Have you ever thought that how can we select this? Look and see all of them. All the code that we have written, all the HTML code are inside something, right? How can we select that thing? That thing is actually root here. So when we say root like this, we write root, and usually in root they define some variables. Usually, for example, we can define a var. This is something that happens. For example, we can say the color, for example, you can say primary color, okay? Some code that we have, for example, # FFF, for example, FFF000. So this would be a color code, and rather than repeating this color code over and over and over again, we can just use that with a var here. Var, for example, primary color. This root section is somewhere that we usually define our variables, is something that to have in mind as well. And the lang attribute is, I think it's kind of stupid because, let's imagine, so we have a p tag and some some French text. Since I do not know any French, I just say some French text, okay? And we set the lang on fr, okay? Or actually, to be precise, let's just search hello. I know hello is bonjour in French, but I don't know the spell. So imagine, yes, bonjour. And we have some French text, okay? And we have set the lang on fr. So in order to select that, we can actually use attribute selector, but there's a shorthand command for that. If we want to, we can say if a lang has a lang of fr, so we can go ahead and set the background color to, say, see, this is background color, set that to something, this. If you come back here, hit refresh, sure enough, this has a background color of that. And the last one is marker, and this marker is actually a pseudo element, and the last thing is full screen. These two that we are going to cover now. And in order to understand the marker, we need to have a UL and LI tag. For example, let's have a UL and LI tag here. And if we take a look at this, we have some markers, some here, text and marker are here, and we can actually go ahead and select these markers. So we can say marker, we can set the color to something here, for example, this one here. So if you come back here, hit refresh, sure enough, the color is not that different. So let's use red so it becomes a little more obvious. So this is it. And that's marker. And for the full screen, actually, we need to use some JavaScript. For example, imagine that we have two functions that they do. The function that they do is to open and close a full screen mode. So let's paste these two functions. Since we are not concentrating on JavaScript, imagine that these two, they are just some function called open full screen and close full screen. Okay, I can copy that. Let's imagine I have two A tags here that they click on that, or a button tag, two button tag, I think is better. Button tag, so we say open full screen, okay, and another one to close full screen. And for both of them, I have a on-click section, so we go ahead and apply an on-click section. And in on-click section, I have this open full screen and this close full screen functions that we are going to see. So when the user clicks on this, it goes ahead and calls this JavaScript function, which enables the full screen mode. So for that, we can actually say, for example, we can say for the full screen, the background color should be, for example, our var primary color or yellow or whatever that is. So if you come back here, hit refresh, so we have those functions. When you open full screen, you can see that the background color yellow is being applied, and when you close it, this is not applied anymore. So this is it. We managed to cover every single CSS selector possible. If I missed something, for example, one of them that I know that I missed was focus visible or things like that. That was so stupid, things like that. I don't know, but I have covered everything I think, and if I missed something, put down in the comments so that I can explain for you. So this is it. Hope that this video was useful for you.